Ontario saw 2 fatalities on construction sites since the beginning of winter, not to mention numerous injuries. As an industry with a labor force of almost 600,000 in this province alone, how adequate is training and safety on the job? And what are the risks these workers face off the job? Here to discuss these issues, plus how to protect those in the profession, we welcome Leah Nebel, partner at Blaney McMurtry LLP and co-chair of the firm's construction law group. Michael Gallardo, CEO at Merit Ontario, a contractors association. Amina Dib, manager of government and stakeholder relations at the Residential Construction Council of Ontario, also known as ResCon. And Shane Mercer, senior journalist at Canadian Occupational Safety. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us in studio. Michael, I'm going to start with you. What are the leading causes of injury and death in Ontario's construction industry?
I would say when you look at the industry as a whole, that's trips, slips, and falls comes to mind, and that's the jargon in the industry. I would say falls are probably the leading cause of injuries on the job site. I think as an industry, it's acknowledged that more needs to be done, but at the same time, there's a lot of investments. The government's investing a lot of money and energy into appointing a chief prevention officer, into making sure that the industry is supported by many means necessary.
All right. Shane, I'm going to get your take on this. This is what you do. You cover anytime there is an incident or something. If you go onto your website, you've got it covered. You're talking about it. I want to get an idea as well to what Michael said. What are some of the leading causes of injury, and how safe is our construction industry as well?
Well, how safe is it? I mean, what are we comparing it to, right? If we're comparing it to all other industries in Canada, or in Ontario in this case, it's one of the highest hazard industries out there. Right. Meaning that, it can be very unsafe. Michael mentioned slips, trips, and falls, industry jargon, but that does, make up a large amount of the types of injuries that we see and how they're caused. But what are the root causes of those slips, trips, and falls? Why did they fall? Why did they slip or trip, or what did they fall off of working at heights? So, that's one aspect of it. But there's so many other areas. Struck by incidents are very high and common. So we're talking about hit by a beam, hit by a large piece of wood, something moving in the air. There's so many hazards on a construction site. In addition to that, struck by incidents, well, there's all that heavy machinery. And that, poses a lot of risks, both for the people around the heavy machinery, but also those operating it. Construction workers find themselves in all sorts of different scenarios too, right? Construction work could be building a high-rise apartment building, like we see a lot of here in downtown Toronto, but it could be an infrastructure project, working at the side of a road or at the side of a highway. It could be working in a sewer. And, you mentioned some fatalities that occurred recently. That was one that occurred recently. We saw a construction worker drown in a sewer in Mississauga at the beginning of December. That was an issue that, stems from working in confined spaces. So, these are some of the ways that people die and get hurt on construction sites. Many ways.
Leah, I'm going to come to you. For over 40 years, the Ontario Health and Safety Act has been keeping workers safe, and one of the key legislations that regulates construction safety. Break it down for us a little bit. Tell us a little bit more of the significance of this act when we talk about the construction industry.
Sure. So the Ontario's Occupational Health and Safety Act is the statute in Ontario that sets out the health and safety requirements for workplaces in Ontario. So it's a law that has to be followed, and there are many sections in the Act that set out duties and obligations of various people. So specific to the construction industry is a person known as a constructor. That's a defined term in the Act. And the significance of being a constructor on a construction site, and typically that role would fall with a general contractor. So an owner hires a general contractor to build a building. Usually the general contractor becomes the constructor under the Act. And that person is responsible for ensuring that everybody on the project complies with the Act and everything that needs to be done to ensure safe working conditions. Now, there's also a term called employer. So a constructor can also be an employer.
Okay.
So legal liability is one of the reasons why being the constructor matters, because when there is an incident, an injury, or a fatality, the constructor could be charged under the Occupational Health and Safety Act for violating a certain provision. But typically it's the boots on the ground people that are, to have a site supervisor to make sure that, hey, if somebody's not tied off, telling that worker,
right,
you better tie off.
Okay, very good. Amina, I'm going to come to you. When it comes to safety and training and resources, what are the biggest challenges for both employers and workers?
Yeah, so I think working in construction, the construction industry is a very dynamic environment. Workers are operating in that dynamic environment, and really the only constant is change. And while employers, they identify hazards and they either mitigate or eliminate them, the constant change is a challenge. I would actually say it's what we're seeing in the last 5 to 10 years. I would frame it more as an opportunity. So health and safety has become all-encompassing. It's not just limited to the health and safety department or a couple people on site. It's really every facet of an organization now. And with that, we've had the opportunity in construction to include and incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion, and mental health and wellness into our health and safety plans. And again, I would frame that more as an opportunity, but it is an added consideration to take into account.
Shane, I'm going to get your take on that as well. When it comes to safety and training and resources, what would you say is some of the biggest challenges for both employers and workers? Do you see it as Amina says, an opportunity here?
I mean, training is obviously at the core of safety, right? And so making sure that workers are adequately trained for the job they're going to be performing is a challenge for the companies, and it all depends on whether that company is hiring unionized workers or not. That plays a pivotal part in what kind of training those workers are going to have. So what we tend to see is that unionized workers are typically better trained. They are further along in their training. So what I mean by that is that they're journey persons as opposed to apprentices. They've got more experience applying that skilled trade, so whatever it may be, electrical, plumbing, etc. Additionally, the unions tend to heavily invest in safety training to the tune of $40 million a year. That's a national figure, not necessarily here in Ontario, but they significantly invest in safety training. And so you're more likely to have workers who have the certifications that they need to work at heights, to work in confined spaces, to operate that piece of heavy machinery. Amina also mentioned how dynamic the construction industry is. There are many different certifications required for the various jobs that could be performed. And one job might take a week, and then they move on to another job where a whole new set of safety training and requirements are needed. So as you can imagine then that for a construction company or the union, but if it is a company that's hiring non-unionized employees, how difficult that might be for that company to keep up on that training.
All right, with that, I'm going to have to come to you, Michael. Of course, your organization represents open shop employers and employees, meaning that they're not members of unions. And to add to that, According to the Institute for Work and Health, the injury rate of construction workers in Ontario is 23% higher among non-unionized workers. How concerning is that? But I want to give you a chance also to respond to what Shane said there as well.
Absolutely, and then first I want to address safety is not a non-union or union issue. It's I think all contractors, and having been on both sides representing both union and non-union contractors, I think when you look at safety, it's a motherhood. It doesn't stop at the door. It's on the job sites everywhere in the company. So all companies, whether union or non, are committed to safety. I've talked to employers. We provide training. It's simply not true that union job sites are safer. 70% of the marketplace in Canada, I would say, is non-union. Many companies, many contractors, whether they're GCs, whether they're subcontractors, whether they're specialty contractors, they take safety seriously. I think anytime there is an incident, it's far too many. But bottom line, it is not true that union sites are safer. A lot of it is rhetoric that you hear in the marketplace. Merit Ontario has invested millions of dollars in safety. We provide safety training online. We provide it to make sure that companies up north receive the training because of accessibility. We make sure that we provide new and innovative solutions for training. We provide virtual reality training for for youth coming into construction. So I think, to get down that rabbit hole of union versus non-union, I don't believe in that. I love construction. I think we need to talk about the positives of construction. I think we need to talk more about that it offers so many opportunities for people looking for a career in construction. I think not one employer that I know doesn't believe in safety. And I think, it's always a tragedy, but I think, when you think about all the employees that they hire, not one of them, they all care about their employees. They want to make sure when they show up to a job site, they go home safely to their families.
Okay. Amina, I want to come to you. How does gender factor into the health and safety on construction sites?
I think certainly women, it's no secret that women are few and far between in the construction industry. Ranges no more than, I think, 7% construction workers are women on site. And like I said before, within the last couple of years, more employers and people on site are really starting to point out that if you're a woman and you're not getting treated properly, whether you're being bullied or you can't find well-fitting personal protective equipment, whether that be the boots, the hard hat, the vest, you're not going to feel included. And inclusion is a health and safety issue. If you don't feel included because you're a woman, you might not feel comfortable going to the health and safety rep or your foreperson to maybe ask a question about am I doing this right? I don't know if this is a safety concern. So certainly it is women are treated differently, and I think that's a health and safety concern, but I also think it's a skilled trades issue from a recruitment and retention standpoint.
Lee, I'm going to come to you. Even outside of the construction industry, all workers have the right to refuse unsafe work. But when we talk about the construction industry, is it always easy to do so? Because I know you've worked on a number of cases and stuff. It is not as simple as that.
You are correct. Under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, all workers have the right to refuse unsafe work. And that could be a piece of machinery or equipment that the user, if they were to use it, would put themselves in danger or would put a worker in danger. So I think Amina has already touched on this a little bit. Some female workers may feel a little bit reluctant to mention potential health and safety issues. Maybe they don't want to be seen as not being tough on the job. Maybe there's a fear of reprisal, although under the OHSA, you can't be dismissed or anything like that for reporting what you believe to be something that's going to put your life in danger or somebody else. It could also be somebody who's newer to Canada, who's just starting out in the construction industry. Maybe they're sending money home and they're fearful for their jobs. They don't want to cause any trouble. Everybody knows that once there's an issue, depending on what the issue is with health and safety, it could cause a delay on the project as well. So people want their projects to be done on time and on budget. And so I think sometimes, depending on the position that you're in on the construction site, you might feel reluctant to report it. But you should. You really should.
Shane, I'm going to come to you to follow up on that. Is it more challenging for a certain group of workers? When I think of some incidences, there's one in 2009 that rings a bell, migrant workers who died in Toronto after falling from a scaffolding on Christmas Eve, and I believe it was 4 workers who were working on a high-rise, I believe. Is it more challenging for a certain group of workers?
Yes, absolutely it is. So I want to pick up on 2 points that have been made. First, by Michael. Everybody cares about safety. Okay, whether it's the company, the union, government. I have never spoken to anybody who says they don't care about safety. Okay, everybody wants their employees to go home at the end of the day. That being said, you referenced the study from the Institute for Work and Health. Yep. 23%. That was from a data set that led up to 2011. They did a second group of research that looked at data from 2012 to 2018, and the number was actually even higher. It was closer to 30% of fewer lost time injuries among unionized workers as opposed to non-unionized workers. So the research is there. It speaks for itself. So are there workers who have greater challenges? I would say that non-unionized workers have a greater challenge on a job site. Based on the research. This isn't something that I'm making up. This is what I've gathered from talking to people and from what I've seen in terms of studies and research. So I think that that's important to point out. Another group of workers who experiences challenges on job sites are women. Amina brought it up, personal protective equipment. The CSA group recently did a study that found something like 46%, almost half of women working in skilled trades in heavy industry. So whether that's construction or it could be oil and gas or another form of heavy industry, found, almost half of women who were surveyed reported not only not having proper PPE, proper fitting PPE, but actually being hurt on the job because they didn't have that personal protective equipment. So those are 2 groups of workers that I would say experience more challenges in the industry.
I'm going to have to get you to respond, of course, to Shane. And then I do want to ask you after that as well. You know, many of these workers in construction sites are foreign workers on work permits. Are there adequate resources to ensure the safety of those workers as well? But I'll get you a chance to respond to Shane.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, that study that Shane's referring to was a study done by a pro-union lobby group and advocacy group. I'm not here to question the validity of the findings, but again, I go back to the idea that you mentioned migrant workers. Anybody that gets into construction, it's the employer's responsibility to ensure that there's competency in the field.
Right.
For example, if you tell me, hey, I'm very capable and I have the ticket to run this heavy equipment, no problem. You show up to the job site. And we have to assess competency. We have to ensure that for your own safety and for the safety of those around you. So employers are always and constantly measuring that. And I think, and depending on larger companies are more sophisticated. I think council here has seen, mounds and mounds of paperwork to show all the procedures were taken from the company. But if it's a smaller company, if it's a non-union company, there's also consultants out there that they'll hire to bring in to do competency checks. So I think overall, again, not to go down into the weeds of the study or whether union or non-union is safer, I think we really need to focus on attraction. We really need to focus on the positives that construction brings to the table in terms of lifelong opportunities, in terms of the steps that contractors and the industry as a whole are making. The government has made significant investments right now in union training centers, in upgrading facilities for colleges that provide skilled trade for apprenticeships. On the non-union side, we've made millions of dollars of investment in training as well. Many of my members have invested. And so it's one thing is to say and talk safety. And to Amina's point, there is safety is not on the tools, on equipment. It's a culture of safety, making sure that when anybody walks onto a job site, if they're a foreign worker, that they have the proper supports there. There's language barriers, making sure that they're provided or given supports, and all contractors do it. I think it's important to take away that as an industry, we recognize that there's a shortage. We also recognize that we have to step up. And I think, again, I've seen both sides of the story. I've represented both the union and the non, and contractors as a whole want to make sure that those people that they employ are trained, and there's an education piece we have to ensure that the public and that your viewers should know about, that we're committed to education on workplace harassment, on making sure that diversity and inclusion is part of the discussions. There's been so many hires and so many investments from companies hiring new managers that are diversity managers. And I've seen an increase of women coming into management positions. And I think it's incredible. And I think there's so many opportunities for people considering construction to come in. We talk about safety on the job site, but we also have to ensure that the system itself is supported. Estimators, accountants, project managers, they're in demand too. And all of that leads to, again, I go back to a culture of safety, because we want to ensure that we're inclusive and that we bring in the best and brightest anywhere.
Very good. We got Leah to step in there as well.
I completely agree about having a safety culture and a safety-first attitude. The issue arises, though, when exceptions occur. So you had mentioned the 2009 incident that happened on Christmas Eve. That was a tragedy. 4 out of 6 workers were killed. And it is basically what happened is they were restoring balconies on some high-rise buildings. And it was Christmas Eve. There was a swing stage. 6 workers went onto the swing stage, and there were only 2 lifelines. The swing stage collapsed, and 4 workers died. One was very injured. One was able to climb back onto the balcony, but that was a tragedy. Some of those workers hadn't been in Canada for very long. Michael talked about having training in your own language. Well, as part of what happened there should have been some training in their language as to proper procedures to follow. There was also some marijuana found in the workers' systems after the fact. So that is one where, from a legal point of view, it's the first time that a person, and this was a foreman, was actually charged criminally and convicted to 3.5 years in prison. So there can be significant consequences. The company that was doing the work, they were fined under the OHSA. They were also charged criminally, and they paid a massive fine. But the families of those workers were the ones who really suffered at the end of the day. So while I agree that everybody thinks safety is important, when there are deviations, that's when we have this loss of life that nobody can make up for.
Shane, I'm going to come to you. Last month, construction workers in Quebec, we're looking out east, were protesting the new occupational health and safety provisions, which came into effect January 1st this year. Give us a little background on there. What's that about, and why should Ontarians be paying attention to what's happening there as well?
Well, what's interesting there is, again, we've got a dynamic here of, industry companies, business at odds with the union, with the unions there in Quebec, several different unions involved. And so what's going on is we have these new workplace health and safety provisions that are now essentially in effect there. But the employers, the groups of construction employers, the associations, they want it to be postponed. They want a delay, because what they're arguing is that these new health and safety provisions, one of the things included in there is that there must be a union health and safety representative on each job site, depending on the size of the job. And what the employer associations are saying is that the law is unclear as to exactly what the qualifications would be for that health and safety representative appointed by the unions. And so, one, there's no pay structure involved. So how do we pay them? What qualifies them to be a health and safety representative? They say that kind of information is unclear. It's not made clear in the law, and they want it postponed. Additionally, they're worried about, well, who becomes in charge of safety on the site, right? Because already the construction companies, the employers, they need to have a health and safety professional on site already. Now you're going to have the unions appointing a health and safety representative who may or may not have health and safety qualifications, also in charge of health and safety on the site, sort of putting, it becomes an issue of, well, who's really in charge of health and safety on the site? And so that's why they're asking for a postponement. I'm not sure that they're going to get it, but again, it's that sort of friction between the employers and the unions.
We have about a minute left. Time goes by really quickly here. I'm going to come to you, Amina. Sort of a big question. Something that we've talked about a lot is on-site, a little bit of off-site. When we talk about things like opioid use with construction workers, mental health, big question here, but what do we need to create a safer, better future for construction workers in Ontario with that in mind?
Sure. So I think, again, making the point that health and safety is not just, it's all-encompassing now. You need buy-in, especially for these newer issues like diversity, equity, inclusion, and mental health. You need buy-in from top to bottom. But I think collaboration and communication is key, and early on. Not waiting for someone to come to you and be like, I'm struggling with my mental health or I'm struggling with an addiction. Not waiting for that to happen, so being a bit more proactive. Which is, I think, easier with issues like diversity, equity, inclusion, and mental health and addictions. It's the hazards are still there, but they're not as physical in front of you. So it requires you to be a bit more reactive. I think working with government the way we did with COVID, and giving it the same sort of urgency as COVID and some of these physical hazards that we're keeping in mind every day. And then the naloxone requirements, which are coming into effect as of June for certain employers and workplaces. I think that's great, but again, that is less about prevention. You're using a naloxone kit. That's like pretty much the last point. So a bit more prevention and removing the stigma within the culture of construction. It is male-dominated. The macho culture still exists, and I think we need to be talking about that a lot more. Even though it's not always positive, I think we need to kind of come to terms with it. It is a very macho industry, and things aren't going to change as it relates to mental health if we don't kind of remove the stigma and get more women, really, and different people.
All right, we're going to unfortunately have to leave it there. Great stuff. Thank you so much, Amina, Michael, Shane, Leo. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.